Hi all, today we're going to have a short lecture on Engel and the moral status of non-human animals. So we'll be talking about the two articles that we read for this week. One was the mere considerability of animals, and the other article was the immorality of eating meat. So here he is, Engel, alive, still working and writing. And in his article, The Mere Considerability of Animals, he considers three positions. So one view is that animals deserve equal moral consideration to that we owe to human beings. So we should be, in effect, strictly indifferent as to whether we're harming or killing an animal or harming or killing a person. The other view he calls minimal yet non-negligible considerability. So this view is that we owe animals some moral consideration, but not nearly as much as we owe human beings. But it is definitely some, and we need to consider them when making decisions. And the final view here is the no considerability view, so that animals deserve no direct moral consideration. And in certain situations, we can do whatever we want to non-human animals. So we'll take these one by one, starting with equal considerability, then no considerability, and then we'll get to what he says is actually our view, minimal yet non-negligible considerability. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so the equal considerability thesis is that animals deserve equal moral consideration to that we owe humans. Arguments for this position are developed by utilitarians like Peter Singer and deontologists like Tom Regan. So Peter Singer says animals deserve equal moral consideration. So the utilitarian argument we've talked about goes something like pleasure and pain. We're trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain in the world. Animals can feel pleasure and pain, so the pleasure and pain that animals feel goes equally into our calculations as the pleasure and pain that humans feel. Since we're trying to maximize a quality, that quality being pleasure, and minimize another quality, that quality being pain, and create the greatest overall balance of pleasure over pain, we need to consider every being that can feel pleasure and pain, and consider that pleasure and pain equally in our calculations. Tom Regan is a deontologist, but unlike Kant, Tom Regan thinks that animals deserve equal rights as human beings. So because non-human animals have certain low-level mental capacities. Specifically, they are what he calls the experiencing subjects of a life, just like we are. So they have things like memory, perception, low-level mental capacities like this. He says animals deserve equal rights as the rights we owe humans. Now, that doesn't mean that they have all the rights that humans have. Where we have the right to vote, it would be meaningless to offer a non-human animal the right to vote. They have no interest in it, but they do have an interest in some of the things that we consider rights for ourselves, things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We would owe animals rights like that. And how strong would those obligations be to not violate those rights? The same strength as human rights and our obligations to look to not violate those human rights. So the arguments that Singer and Regan offer, and others who support this equal considerability thesis, they're often supported by considerations of how we could extend equal moral consideration to, in the literature, what's called marginal human beings in a principled way. So when we look at all the capacities that various human beings have, we find that many have high-level mental capacities like autonomy and rationality and these things we've talked about before, but many do not have autonomy and nor rationality. Many have a very low-level mental capacities, and all of us have been in this situation at one point in our lives when we were children. So children, not being very smart, have very low-level mental capacities, and then there are some people who are mentally disabled to such an extent that they are not rational or are not autonomous, but they would have some of these low-level mental capacities of being able to perceive the world, being able to form memories, things like that. So if we want to extend moral consideration to those human beings who don't have those high-level mental capacities, and we want to do it in a principled way, then we would extend equal moral consideration based on the capacities that we share with them. So things like perception and memory and things like that. The issue is, if we're going to extend moral consideration to those beings, to those human beings, then it seems like if we're principled about it, we have to extend equal moral consideration to those non-human animals that have the same mental capacities as those in the literature, again, called marginal humans. But Engel points out that there are some issues with these equal considerability views. The issues revolve around them leading to very counterintuitive solutions to some thought experiments. So the first is the life raft thought experiment. Engel has us imagine there were 4 human beings and 1 dog on a life raft, and the life raft only has enough flotation power to support 4 beings, so we have to throw 1 being off and that they would die. So if animals deserve equal consideration, then he says, wouldn't we have to be strictly indifferent as to which of those 5 beings was thrown off the raft, whether it was one of the 4 humans or the dog? We should be strictly indifferent if animals deserve exactly equal consideration to human beings. The other problem, or the other thought experiment that we might think about, when it comes to human beings, if we saw that one human being was attempting to kill another human being without a good justification, then all other options being taken away from us, it seems that it might be morally permissible to kill the person who is unjustifiably going to kill somebody else. But if animals deserve equal moral consideration, then if we saw somebody was going to unjustifiably kill an animal, then if the animal deserves equal consideration, then it seems that we would be justified in killing the person that was going to kill the animal. And that just doesn't feel right, even to a pretty hardcore vegetarian. This equal considerability, or the consequences of this equal considerability view, seem very counterintuitive. Now, in Singer and Regan's defense, they both do offer defenses to try to bring their views more in line with what we might call common sense on these 2 problems. Singer, by talking about the long-term interest that humans have that could be frustrated if we kill them, where that's not necessarily the case with non-human animals. So we'd have what he calls non-speciesist reasons for, if we had to, preferring to kill the non-human animal than the human. And for Regan, he says, even though the beings, say, on that life raft have equal rights, it would be worse for a human to have to kill another human. So even though the rights are equal, when we consider the feeling of the person doing the throwing of the being off the raft, then we should lean towards them throwing the dog off instead of the person. So they have some sophisticated defenses to these problems, but Engel registers that they are at least on the face of it very counterintuitive. So he considers one of the other three positions, and that's the no considerability view. So this view says animals deserve no direct moral consideration. So this position is espoused by deontologists like Kant and social contract theorists, and it's often supported by arguments which require high-level mental capacities for membership in the moral community, for deserving moral consideration. So high-level mental capacities like rationality, like autonomy, so understanding moral claims, being able to be motivated by moral considerations. These are abilities that, as far as we know, only some human beings have. The problems with this view are that it would allow us to treat non-human animals in any way we please, and even some human beings in any way we please, those that do not have these high-level mental capacities. So this view would permit us to do whatever we wanted to infants, to do whatever we wanted to stray cats walking down the street. Even with Kant's proposed fixes of treating animals as if they're people's property, so you'd violate a person's property right if you hurt a pet, or hurting animals might lead to hurting human beings. There would be exceptions to all these cases, and in certain cases we'd be allowed to treat animals in any way we please, and that seems counterintuitive. So the equal considerability view ran into very counterintuitive implications, and so does the no considerability view. So the view that Engel says that we all hold is what he calls the mere considerability view, or the view that animals deserve minimal yet non-negligible consideration. So this is the view that animals deserve some moral consideration, not nearly as much as human beings, just a minimal level of moral consideration. But it is some consideration. So this view, he says, requires that we not harm animals unnecessarily. So when the harm we would produce or we would cause animals is not outweighed by some greater good for ourselves, then he says that harm will not be justified. Or another way of spelling out this view means that our trivial interests do not outweigh the vital interests of animals. So while our vital interests are more important than their vital interests, while our trivial interests are more important than their trivial interests on this view, their vital interests count more than our trivial interests. So we might wonder what counts as a trivial interest and what counts as a vital interest. So what would count as a vital interest would be something like living or not being tortured. These would be vital interests of both humans and animals. These are our vital interests. And what counts as a trivial interest? Well, things like mere fleeting enjoyment would count as a trivial interest. Things like taste would count as a trivial interest. So if we could survive not eating animals, and if our interest in eating them was reducible down to just the taste we get from eating them, then their vital interests in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or at least life, would outweigh our trivial interest in tasting them. So, what are some virtues of this view? Well, some virtues of the view are that this view doesn't run into the problems that we had with equal considerability. So, whereas the equal considerability view had a problem with the life raft case, this minimal yet non-negligible considerability view does not have that problem. So if there were 4 people and a dog on a raft, and if we had to throw one off, consigning it to death, then on this view, it would be very understandable. It would be justified to throw the dog off, because while the dog deserves moral consideration, it's not equal to the consideration we owe human beings. The other virtue is it easily explains why torturing animals is wrong. So the no considerability view didn't have the resources to explain why torturing animals for our mere enjoyment is wrong, but this view does explain why it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because they deserve some consideration, and their vital interests outweigh our trivial interests. So if somebody was torturing a cat, and we asked them why they were doing it, and they said, oh, I just really like the feeling I get from torturing it, this minimal yet non-negligible considerability view would explain that that's wrong, because it was treating the vital interests of the cat in not being tortured as being outweighed by the trivial interest in feeling good torturing it. So it easily explains why that cat case is wrong. It also would explain why there was a case many years back now, when Michael Vick, a quarterback for then the Atlanta Falcons, he was running, or he was supporting his friends in running a dogfighting ring, and everybody was morally outraged by it. Not everybody, but most people were morally outraged by it. And this minimal yet non-negligible considerability view easily explains why what he did was wrong. He was supporting people who were treating the trivial interest they had in watching the dogs fight as if it outweighed the vital interests of the dogs in surviving and not suffering. So the virtues of this view is that it's more intuitive than the equal considerability view, and more intuitive than the no considerability view. So this is why Engel will end up saying things like, this is the view that you have. And I think he's right about it. If these are our three options, then the option that seems most intuitive, that we wouldn't have to be convinced of, is that animals deserve moral consideration, some, but not as much as human beings. So this counts as a virtue of the view. Now, what are the implications of what he calls our view? Well, one of the implications concerns the morality of eating meat or animal products. So if animals deserve minimal yet non-negligible consideration, then it is morally wrong to unnecessarily kill them or cause them pain. Engel goes on to explain that animal agriculture unnecessarily causes animals pain and kills them. So unnecessarily meaning what? Meaning that there's no outweighing good that's produced by the suffering and death caused to them. Therefore, he concludes, animal agriculture is immoral. And if it's the case that you should not support immoral industries, then it would follow that you should not support animal agriculture. And if purchasing meat and other animal products supports animal agriculture, then you should stop purchasing meat and other animal products. So this view, this commitment to ceasing to purchase animal products for consumption or use when those products are the result of unnecessarily harming and killing animals, follows directly from this minimal yet non-negligible considerability view. And recall that that's the view he says we all have. So this is why he'll say things like, your view on animals already commits you to a vegan or strict vegetarian lifestyle. We don't need to talk about controversial theories like utilitarianism or deontology. We can just talk about things you already believe to show that you already believe that a vegan lifestyle is the one that you should be living. All right, so if we're on board with the claim, with the position that animals deserve minimal yet non-negligible consideration, which means we're on board with the claim that the vital interests of animals outweigh the trivial interests of human beings, which means we're on board with the claim that we should not kill or cause them suffering unnecessarily. Engel still owes us some support for premise 2, that animal agriculture unnecessarily causes animals pain and kills them. So let's see how he supports this premise, because if he does, it seems like his argument goes through. So does animal agriculture cause animals to suffer and die? It obviously kills them. So how much do the animals suffer? Well, some brief research produced these facts. 95% of farm animals are raised in factory farms. And then I just looked up the conditions in factory farms. There are issues with cages and overcrowding. There are physical altercations like teeth clipping, tail docking, all performed without anesthetic, indoor confinement with poor air quality and unnatural light patterns, inability to engage in natural behaviors, breeding for fast growth, or high yields of meat, milk, and eggs that compromises animal welfare, neglect of sick and suffering animals, misuse of antibiotics to compensate for unsanitary conditions, rough or abusive handling by workers, and this list could go on and on. When transporting animals, it's often causes suffering for the animals. And yeah, I won't show videos for this. I won't delve into these facts, but if you read the paper, you probably read some facts about factory farming and animal agriculture that are shocking. Engel is very careful to cite reputable sources when it comes to these facts about factory farming, but look them up yourself, and I think you'll see that it's undeniable that this process causes animals much suffering and kills them. So then we need Engel to explain how this suffering and death is unnecessary. Because I think the normal view is that it's necessary for something really important, and that's the nourishment of human beings. So let's see if he can support the claim that it's unnecessary. So, is the suffering and death unnecessary? It is unnecessary for living, as evidenced by the existence of vegetarians and vegans and their longer than average lifespans. I looked up some statements from nutritional bodies of nutritional experts, and got a couple statements here. One from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, that vegan diets are as healthy and nutritionally adequate and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases and are appropriate in all stages of the life cycle. And from the Proceedings of the Nutrition Society, the data suggests that the health of Western vegetarians is good and similar to that of comparable non-vegetarians. So it's not necessary for living. It's not necessary for nutrition. But somebody might make the claim, well, though it's not necessary for those things, it's certainly necessary for thriving. And what I think they have in mind when they're talking about thriving is something like optimal nutrition, or the kind of nutrition that one would need to perform world-class athletic feats, like being an Olympian or a power lifter or a world-class athlete in one of the major sports. But unfortunately for somebody raising that objection, it's just not true. Eating animal products is not necessary for world-class athletic feats. You can, on your own, look up Patrick Baboumian, who at one point was considered the strongest man in the world. Maybe even today, he competes in these types of competitions and has been vegetarian for a long time and strictly vegan for a significant amount of time. Carl Lewis, when he won some of his gold medals, was eating a strictly vegan diet. Carl Lewis, for those of you who don't know, was a very impressive Olympian, multiple gold medals in track and field, including the 100-yard dash. Former #1 tennis player in the world, Venus Williams, eats a vegan diet. Currently, I think she's ranked in the 30s. And world #1 on the men's side, Novak Djokovic, he also has adopted a vegan diet, and basketball player Damian Lillard has. So I can't imagine somebody having athletic aspirations much beyond these athletes, and they achieved many of their feats while eating a strictly vegan diet. So it seems it is strictly unnecessary for living, eating animal products, and it's strictly unnecessary for world-class athletic feats, so thriving and optimal nutrition. So that leads me to a sound bite here. Thinking back to the case of Michael Vick. Michael Vick's actions supporting dogfighting were wrong because he supported causing unnecessary suffering and death to animals who deserved moral consideration. He acted as if the dog's vital interests in not suffering and dying were outweighed by people's trivial interests in seeing them fight. And the view under consideration here, the minimal yet non-negligible considerability view, does a nice job of spelling out why Michael Vick's actions were wrong. The issue is, it also does a really nice job of explaining why eating meat and other animal products is wrong. Eating meat and other animal products is wrong because it supports causing more unnecessary suffering and death to animals who deserve some moral consideration. When we eat meat and other animal products, we act as if animals' vital interest in not suffering and dying are outweighed by our trivial interest in the taste of their flesh and their secretions. So both of these actions are wrong for the same reason. Treating a non-human animal's vital interests as if they're outweighed by our trivial interests. Since eating them is unnecessary, and since the process by which they come to our plates involves avoidable suffering and death, then it's unnecessarily causing them suffering and harm, and we think that's wrong. So that's the case. That's the case for the immorality of eating meat, why he says you're committed to the immorality of eating meat. He's not trying to convince you of something here that you don't already believe as far as how much consideration animals deserve. But he is showing us the implications of our view, how much consideration we think animals deserve. But I do want to talk about some edge cases. So I've looked high and low for good objections to this view, and I have found some papers with titles like Engel is wrong, eating meat is fine, and then I read them, and what ends up occurring is, or what I end up finding are some edge cases where even if we agree with Engel's argument really from start to finish, it doesn't quite get to his conclusion that eating meat is always immoral, just almost always immoral. So there are some edge cases which I would want to discuss. So one case which doesn't occur in real life, but does occur in these discussions, is imagine you and a cow are stranded on a desert island, and if you don't eat the cow, you guys are both going to die. But if you eat the cow, you'll live a little longer. The cow will, of course, die at your hands. On Engel's view, if animals deserve minimal yet non-negligible consideration, then he says their vital interests outweigh our trivial interests. But this would be a case of vital interest versus vital interest. So in this case, even if we accept the minimal yet non-negligible considerability thesis, it would still be permissible to kill and eat the cow. Because in cases of vital interest versus vital interest, we deserve more consideration than the cow, so our vital interest wins out. Also, people living in extreme climates. So somebody living where they don't have access to plant food and, or at least enough plant food to sustain themselves, and all they can do to sustain their own lives, kill and eat animals, like people living in extreme cold, maybe with underdeveloped technology. In that case, I think Engel would have to say, in that case, they're allowed. It's vital interest versus vital interest, and human beings' vital interests outweigh the non-human animals' vital interests. In the case of roadkill, and this was the paper I found. I thought I was finding a good objection to Engel, but it turned out the person was just arguing that eating roadkill was permissible in Engel's view. If an animal has been killed and eating it won't lead to the further suffering of more animals, so the killing was incidental to, I don't want to say that. So if the killing was accidental and there's just a creature dead and eating it won't cause more suffering down the road, more unnecessary suffering or death down the road, then I think he would have to say it's okay. And for similar reasons, I think you would have to say it's okay for food about to be thrown away. If somebody ate half a steak and they were dropping it in the trash and you snatched it from getting thrown in the trash and you ate the rest of the steak, I think you would have to say that that would be okay because you're not supporting the industry in that in that action. And lastly, eggs from chickens. You are a friend ethically raised. So I've taught this article before, and a student in my class said they raise chickens and that the chickens are super happy and that they just walk around laying eggs. So they brought eggs, even though I'm a big supporter of Engel's argument, I felt like that was ethically permissible since it wasn't causing the chickens unnecessary harm or death. Now note I didn't list here milk from cows because when do cows lactate? They lactate when other mammals would lactate after they've so they have to have been pregnant to lactate. So they're either pregnant or have been pregnant, or they're being given hormones to trick their body into thinking they're pregnant, which I would imagine causes them discomfort. So I'm not sure that that would be permissible in Engel's view. But these edge cases, I think Engel would have to allow. Now, that would cut down on the vast majority of consumption of animal products, but I do want to be fair to Engel's case. All right, so now we'll jump into some quiz questions. So quiz question number 1. True or false? In order to support ethical vegetarianism, one would need to first establish that animals deserve equal consideration to that we owe humans. Quiz question number 2. Why is the no considerability view wrong according to Engel? A, animals can feel happiness. B, animals are rational and autonomous. Or C, it would imply that torturing animals is permissible or allowed. And then quiz question number 3. True or false? Minimal yet non-negligible considerability explains why it is always wrong to kill and eat animals. So again, minimal yet non-negligible considerability explains why it is always wrong to kill and eat animals. All right, so hopping down off my podium, or I guess just discussing Engel's view and what he takes to be your view, that's the end of our lecture for today. So go ahead and answer those quiz questions, and I will put up a discussion question for us to talk about. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.